When Kou was first revealed to the SRB2 world 2 years ago, his trailer concluded with a cryptic tease for a future character. During those 2 years since, Kou released, my channel doubled in size, and I learnt the importance of occasionally taking a breath during my commentary. But as far as I'm aware, absolutely no further details were given to expand on who these were supposed to be. That was, until a few weeks ago, when out of the blue, DrStephen released the Echoes of the Abyss update for his self-titled character pack. The silhouettes were revealed to be the new playable character, Echoes the Fennec Fox, and her stand, Abyss the Dragon Serpent. Now, I don't want to force myself into this tale, but I would just point out that this update came out of nowhere just a fortnight after my long belated Kou review, so I'm going to go ahead and claim that my praise for Kou convinced the development team to finish their work on the update as soon as possible. You're welcome. Alright, maybe the release was a coincidence, but while the StephChars pack is fresh in my mind and has just enjoyed a new major update, I see no reason to do as I did with Kou and wait months to cover Echoes. Doubly so in this case, because I have been having a blast playing as her. I haven't clicked with the character this quickly and this well, ever, as far as I can remember. The combinations of saddle leaps, void glides and phantom twirls flow together like a macabre dance of negative energies, and I grokked how the whole character came together as soon as I got my hands on them. They are fantastic. If you just wanted my final verdict, you're free to leave now, I guess, but if you wanted something a little more in-depth, here are my thoughts on Echoes and Abyss. As I mentioned at the start of Kou's review, every member of the Champions of Nova, the set of characters that make up the StephChars pack, takes inspiration from other games. This is on a spectrum. Some characters use the foundations and fundamentals of certain games, or even just individual mechanics from them that Doc liked, and adapt them heavily to fit the 3D platforming genre. Others are just personas of their muses, taking their gameplay mechanics as is, and slapping a PNG of a furry mammal over them in the hope that you don't notice how brazenly Doc has copied those other games. To be fair, it's not like the official Sonic games and cast haven't swooped that low themselves. Skip and Jana are absolutely on the latter side of that spectrum, being furry reincarnations of Hat Girl from A Hat in Time and Zero from Mega Man X respectively, while Kou was much further to the former side, being that he was a remix of fighting game grappler tropes. A recent commenter said that, at least conceptually, that is pretty close to Guacamelee, but seeing that I've never played it and it's never mentioned in his character description, I'm willing to bet on that being a coincidence linked to their similar design goals of translating fighting games into platformers. But hopefully, you can see that each successive character release has been more original than the last, and that theme continues with Echoes. At least on the moveset side of things. Aesthetically, they might just be the most blatantly inspired yet. Their primary gimmick, which I'm just building up to now, is apparently partially based on the Lost from the Binding of Isaac, but everything else? All shiny and new. So, what is that primary gimmick? She's got a stand, you might say, so could be anything. Freezing time? Flipping gravity? Manipulating air pressure? Digging memories out of the ground? Casting a fishing line to rip apart your opponent's organs? Making people smaller to get close to you? Manipulating the iron within organic life forms? Jeez, JoJo's is weird. But anyway, it's none of that. Don't know how much of that would work in SRB2. Instead, Echoes' unique trait is that she's f***ing pathetic and dies in one hit. I never said that the trait was going to be good. Echoes is the absolute embodiment of the glass cannon, because he bypasses the typical ring system and is instead entirely reliant on Abyss for defense. If you get hit while Abyss is active, then Abyss takes the attack for you and disappears, leaving you vulnerable and with significantly weaker abilities. If you get hit again after that, you'll die immediately, regardless of how many rings you have at the time, which might sound like it makes Echoes a very difficult character to play as. And yeah, that level of vulnerability is certainly not preferable, but honestly, I didn't find it all too bad, and if I can manage to have fun as a character that punishes mistakes that badly, then all of you definitely can. For starters, Echoes is very powerful and agile, so you'll be able to take almost every shortcut, skip and character path you can find to take easy routes and spend as little time in a level as possible, because as we all know, the best way to avoid taking damage in a level is to simply not be in it. Secondly, just like Kou, Echoes has a parry mechanic, but it has been modified slightly. This time it's part of both the Void Glide and Phantom Twirl, but there's now also a much longer cooldown before it can be triggered again. I have a few thoughts more on this, so I'll go a little more in depth on it later in the review, but it can save you in the few situations where you can't entirely sidestep danger. Finally, getting hit and losing Abyss isn't too much of a problem. To regenerate him, all you need to do is pass a checkpoint or collect a shield, which will immediately respawn him and return all of your abilities to their original power levels. And as it turns out, when you're really paying attention to them, you'll realise SRB2 was actually pretty generous with the checkpoints and shields. Moving on to her actual, controllable, mapped to buttons moveset, Echoes has 3 abilities, but I think it's fair to say that 2 of them are the cornerstone to the character, with the final one being a nice bonus. Those 2 abilities are the Void Glide and the Phantom Twirl, mapped to jump and spin respectively. Void Glide is a bit difficult to explain beyond the vaguest terms, but it's sort of a fly mixed with a glide with a damaging hitbox. It's really simple when you're playing as Echoes, but I can't place the words to describe it as anything other than a glide precluded by a floaty upwards boost. The giant orb that spawns around you when using this has a slight magnetism effect, pulling in rings and enemies, but the spell is taxing on poor Echoes, so the glide can only be maintained for a limited amount of time before she loses control and falls to the ground. You get a pretty generous window though, and while there were plenty of moments where I held onto my Void Glide, I usually cancelled it quite early, because that stops it from bouncing off walls and causes Echoes to do a little flip, which can give you the tiny amount of height and distance needed to make a platform. Additionally, doing this allows the Void Glide to be comboed into the Phantom Twirl, which is probably Echoes' most versatile ability. This is a quick burst of forward momentum which can be used on the ground and in the air, sort of like a Thok. It damages enemies, destroys spikes and walls, and can be controlled to influence how far the twirl travels and how long its damaging hitbox persists. But it absolutely does not end there. For example, using a Phantom Twirl into a wall will cause Echoes to bounce off of it at an angle, allowing it to be used as a wall jump in tandem with a Void Glide, especially because using a Phantom Twirl after already using a Void Glide will allow you to use a second Void Glide. That massively increases the potential height and distance you can cover, but what if you end up accidentally overshooting a narrow platform because of that? Well, then the Phantom Twirl is still a useful tool, because using it again in the air will cause it to turn into a ground pound. Combining the Void Glide and the Phantom Twirl is the primary way in which you'll blitz through levels as Echoes. The height and distance you can cover just by using these 2 abilities in tandem is phenomenal, especially when you consider both their ease of use and how much control you maintain over your landing in 99% of scenarios. Again, the Void Glide can only be maintained for a limited amount of time, but that limit is so generous that you'll very rarely reach it. And hey, Even if you do, you maintain all of the momentum you currently possess, so you can still reach your target a lot of the time. You can absolutely get away with using just these two abilities and still snap levels in half, even with only a few minutes of practice. However, if you felt that you still weren't getting enough height, perhaps because Abyss has been removed from play or for whatever other reason, there is still one more ability at your disposal. That is the Phantom Leap, which can be accessed by holding spin and then jump while grounded. Depending on how long the jump button was held down for, you will be rocketed into the air to some great height, destroying any enemies or other hazards that happen to be nearby. Due to the fact that you need to be completely still when charging the ability, I didn't find myself using it all that much, especially when the Void Glide and Phantom Twirl combo was often more than enough to get me to the height I needed, but I still got some good use out of this, and it's a great way to start a chain of actions. Hopefully, you can gather how all of this makes Echoes a very fun character to play as. It's great to see a character who has such a low skill floor to achieve such a good sense of flow, considering that to achieve stunts like this with many other characters, you'd need to be practicing for a good few hours. In fact, you might argue that Echoes is actually a bit overpowered, to which I'd say, you are completely correct. Yep, Echoes is going to be able to handle almost any challenge you throw at her outside of combat, and she'll be able to do it pretty quickly, and she'll be able to do it pretty easily, and she'll be able to do it without much preparation or practice beforehand. There is, and I'm being very charitable with this approximation, maybe 3 button sequences you'll need to master Echoes, because the same Void Glide and Phantom Twirl combination is so powerful that it will work in every context. But ironically, being so unbalanced is exactly what makes her balanced, and so fun. To accommodate for her glaring weaknesses regarding durability, her movement options must be deliberately hugely overtuned, because Echoes isn't meant to be some deliberately unwieldy or awkward character to play as. She isn't meant to be an SRB2 equivalent to Tofu Boy, or The Lost, or Coda, characters who have crippling weaknesses that you aren't really meant to overcome, who are just there to be a sick prank or the ultimate challenge for the most dedicated of their game's player base. She's supposed to be a glass cannon, someone like Akuma or Tifa or Phoenix, but of course, when translating a concept usually reserved for fighting games or RPGs to a platformer, the upside to your low health changes from high damage to high mobility. Very high risk, very high reward. And there is still a level of skill here, because some degree of level awareness is required to make a good use of Echoes. She might be able to skip off of any given level, but if you end up landing her on a hazard or in the path of an enemy, you're still going to lose Abyss, and then you really are in troubled waters. It might not be for everyone, but I'm here for it. I can take such a high cost and some rough boss fights if I'm compensated for it with such a fun, versatile, and powerful moveset. With that said, no character is perfect, and Echoes has precisely 2 flaws. These are not that major, and I think one is a bug, but it's persistent enough that I feel the need to mention it, in the hope it may yet to be fixed. Now, I think it's safe to say that the stat that sees the least play between characters is acceleration. While different characters have a wide range of top speeds, weights, sizes and so on, very few make noticeable changes to acceleration, as almost everyone feels like they reach their top speed at the same time and by following the same acceleration gradient. And conceptually, Echoes should feel the same way. 9 times out of 10 you'll set off, accelerate at the same rate, and finally reach your top speed at roughly the same times as almost every other character out there. The problem is that 1 out of 10 times where that doesn't happen, because when Echoes first sets off from a standstill, she has a tendency to get stuck to the ground and either stop accelerating or completely stop. I don't really know why this happens, as while I thought it might originally be something to do with Abyss having his own hitbox that was getting stuck on things, it continued to occasionally occur even when I had hidden him using Custom 1, or even when he had been defeated. So unless Custom 1 just hides his sprite but keeps his possible hitbox intact, it's nothing to do with him. It's not that big of a problem in most circumstances, but it can be a killer in boss battles, especially when you need to stop more often than usual to reorient yourself in the arena. Whatever it is though, I think it must be some sort of glitch or bug. I can't imagine this being a skill issue on my end. I don't think that even I could mess up accelerating in a straight line. The second flaw is in regards to the parry system. As I said earlier, Echoes has a different parrying system to Kou, because whereas you deliberately needed to use a Titan drop specifically with him, here it comes as an automatic effect of using Void Glide or Phantom Twirl. If an attack hits you while under the effects of either ability, Echoes will be dropped out of them and a cooldown is triggered, but Abyss isn't removed from play, so your abilities aren't weakened. The problem is that this occurs completely arbitrarily. For the life of me, I cannot find a consistent rationale for why sometimes an enemy attack will completely bypass the automatic parry, and yet if another attack hits me at the same point in the Void Glide or Phantom Twirl animation, it will be parried. Sometimes an enemy with an active hurtbox will be sucked into the Void Glide and be destroyed, and other times it will cause a parry. Once again, completely arbitrarily. Just like the acceleration problem, in most stages this is an occasional annoyance, but against bosses, it can be a nightmare. You need all of the defensive options that you can get when you're as squishy as this and need to survive a prolonged battle. So when your best tool sometimes decides it wants to have an off day, that can really hurt your chances of victory. The champions of Nova have been inconsistent in regards to super forms. Skip didn't have one, as collecting the Chaos Emeralds just reduced the number of resources required for his crafting gimmick by 25%. Then Jana did have one, before Kou once again removed it in favour of a third level to all of his abilities. If you watch my review and are confused about how I was talking about one there, that's because you can apparently force characters to have super forms by using Pandora's box even if they aren't supposed to have one, something I was unaware could happen when I used it to avoid collecting the Chaos Emeralds. Echoes follows the established pattern, because just like Jana, she does have a super form, and it's a pretty good one. Echoes fuses with the Emeralds and Abyss, giving her the usual set of super abilities, as well as supercharging all of her base ones. As far as I could gather, there aren't any new abilities added, and I'm not sure any new effects have been added to the pre-existing ones, which is usually something I like my transformations to have, but I'm pretty unfazed by their exclusion here. Echoes is a character that's almost powerful enough that a super form is overkill, and due to the fact that you now have invincibility, her single weakness is now irrelevant. I usually like my characters to gain more pronounced changes with their super forms, because it helps to make them play differently to their base form, as a speed increase and invincibility alone don't generally allow the player to think about doing that. They're nice, sure, but I'm not going to play a Sonic any differently because of them. I can just get through levels a bit faster, and I can afford to be a little sloppier. But because having to zealously avoid all damage is such a big part of playing as Echoes, having total invincibility is a game changer, and it does affect how I go about playing as her. There are situations I can afford to let myself get into, locations I no longer have to avoid. Unique super abilities can help differentiate characters in a sea of identical golden faces, but Echoes is already unique enough that they'd almost be indulgent here. I think another reason why Echoes' super form is alright despite not being that theoretically different to her base form, is that she can get into it really easily and very quickly in most stages. 50 rings isn't prohibitively expensive for most characters, but it's a particularly low cost for Echoes, between her ring magnetism and inability to then lose them. Void Glide sucks in plenty of things, but rings seem to be particularly attracted to it, because it isn't unusual for me to use it and suddenly collect 20 rings out of nowhere. Do that a few times, and you're more than ready to go super. And you don't need to worry about losing them either, as because of Echoes' unique damage system, she can only lose rings by dying or going super. Losing Abyss has no effect on your ring count because the game seems to recognise it as effectively losing a shield, and the same goes for a parry. And while a second attack might technically cause you to lose your rings, it doesn't matter because you'll have just died and lost them anyway. I generally ended up going super very quickly in stages where I wanted to use it, and with my constant ring magnetism, I could often sustain the form for most, if not all, of the remainder of the stage, which gives you a bit of a different relationship with it here than with most other characters. It's these contextual subtleties that can make a trait horrendously annoying in one mod, and yet still be the best part of another, or in this case, justify a formulaic superform for one character when it would cause others to lose a lot of points. DrStephen has always been pretty top tier when it comes to sprite work, especially in this character pack, and Echoes is no exception. Skip was cute, Jana was cool, Kou was cocky, and Echoes is on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Dropping back down to the standard character proportions of the roster after Kou's domineering bulk, she has a nervous energy to most of her movements, as she lacks the experience of the rest of her team in running through dangerous locales and treacherous facilities. It's present all of the time, but it becomes particularly exaggerated when Abyss disappears, because with her patron gone, she's even more defenseless than usual. If the gameplay problems of losing Abyss weren't enough, you'll want to avoid it just to stop Echoes from having a premature heart attack. Animation is strong across the board, especially in regard to her taunts, of which she has 2, although I do think that Abyss is a bit flat. He never really emotes or reacts to anything, which makes it difficult to tell what his relationship with Echoes is. He's obviously some powerful spirit, but is he manipulating Echoes? Does he have some nefarious goals of his own? Or is he actually quite nice and just happens to look intimidating? When the two fuse during their super transformation, Echoes does undergo some changes and has a nice new floating animation, but Abyss is nowhere to be seen, which doesn't help make him any more memorable. I sometimes ended up hiding him with custom 1 just to make it easier to see what's in front of me, because with the lack of animations to justify his presence, he can just end up getting in the way. Even if the mission statement was to make another cute character in the image of Skip, it's balanced by some amazing particle effects which show that, even if Abyss is impassive to most everything, he is helping power up Echoes with magic that probably isn't entirely safe or non-corruptive. All of the duo's abilities, while Abyss is present, has this really cool inversion effect to it, which gives them a very different vibe to characters that should, on the face of it at least, have quite similar abilities. Even cooler is the fact that the effect changes if you've popped a shield, with the colour scheme of Abyss and the abilities changing to match each one. The orange look is my personal favourite, although most look just as good as the basic purple and have just as strong of a transparency effect. The effect also stops when Abyss is lost, leaving Echoes with just this desaturated purple energy, and what do you know? Even without considering gameplay, all of your abilities feel so much weaker than before just because of that slight colour shift. All of these effects together help solidify the point behind Echoes' character design and kit, as they exemplified the balance and contrast of this cute little fennec fox who, by herself, isn't all that threatening, with this super powerful dragon spirit that he's entered some sort of presumably Faustian contract with. And speaking of contracts, I made a snide insinuation at the start of the video that for as much as Echoes is probably the most unique member of the Champions of Nova in terms of how she plays, she lacks that originality aesthetically, and I stand by that, because you'll notice the similarities to other characters as soon as you first look at downloading the character. I don't think I'm being unfair when I point to Abyss and say that he bears a striking resemblance to the Snatcher from A Hat in Time, with a similar spectral appearance and identical colour scheme. And I fully believe that's intentional, because DrStephen has obviously played and taken a lot of inspiration from that game over the years. Skip has a simplified version of Hat-Go's moveset and taunts using her infamous emote, and while Jana and Kou looks to other places for their callbacks, Echoes makes up for the missing spotlight twofold. Her sound effects? Most, if not all of them, are from Hat-Go's library of voice lines. Her main taunt? Another rendition of Hat-Go's emote, albeit a more bashful one than usual. Her death animation? Gee, I don't know where I might have heard this music and seen a dead character strike that pose before. The music in her trailer is ripped from A Hat in Time. She has a similar reaction to dashing into a wall without Abyss as Hat-Go does without certain batters. And that's all just stuff I can remember as I'm sitting here writing the script. There's probably more that I'm missing. I'm not going to philosophize about the merits of originality or how many callbacks are acceptable before it becomes annoying or even potentially drifts into plagiarism, and I'll leave it up to you as a viewer to decide where Echo sits in that argument. But it is undeniable that her unique characteristics, like her design and her energy attacks, sit alongside a lot of stuff taken from another character. It's worth a mention when talking about the aesthetics here, even if you think ultimately it has little effect on the mod or its quality. Overall, I think I can finish this review by saying pretty much the same words as I have with every other champion of Nova. Echoes is a great character, who is very fun to play, looks fantastic, has a bunch of secrets and bonuses, including ties to other mods that I haven't talked about, and manages to accomplish all of that while still being approachable and fun to anyone who wants to try her. The damage system might seem daunting, but it's really just a very blunt way to balance a character that would otherwise be arguably too powerful. Don't let it scare you away, but at the same time, if you were excited to play as her because you assumed she'd just be some sort of ultra difficult test of your skill, masochist, then you need to readjust your expectations. I came to grips with her very quickly, and outside of some minor gameplay problems that may well be glitches, she's pretty flawless. Comparing her to the rest of the character pack is difficult because I haven't played as Skip and Jana for a while, and she is very different to Kou, but I'd say I preferred Echoes over him by quite a bit. Seeing as I also sang the praise of Kou throughout most of his review, I think that says a lot. To conclude, if you haven't downloaded the StephChars mod yet, and why wouldn't you have, then this is yet another fantastic reason to get around to doing that. You might also want to think about trying out A Hat in Time, because I'm half convinced DrStephen continues to update the mod just to drip feed glimpses of its best traits. The 2 years in development has really helped create something special in Echoes. I hope you enjoyed the video, and ciao.